and welcome to another episode of MMT Mondays. Over the last few weeks, we have looked at how the end of the gold standard helped usher in the era of neoliberalism. While it's easy to discuss the horrible impacts that austerity politics have had on us here at home, one subject that I want to highlight is how the continued neoliberal exploitation of the global South is not only helping perpetuate continued inequality, but also causing further damage to our environment. Thanks to the tireless work of economists like Dr. Fadhel Kaboub of the Global Institute of Sustainable Prosperity, we see that there is hope for a sovereign, prosperous global South because climate change and economic inequality on a global scale can be tackled at the same time when we look at a global Green New Deal through the lens of MMT. If you would like more context about how colonialism put the global South in this position, make sure to check out the link in the description for our previous episodes that tackle global reparations and colonialism. So let's get to it. As the destructive effects of climate change become more apparent each day, it is becoming abundantly clear that taking a America First approach will not help fight a global issue. At the time of this recording, the southeastern United States is bracing for the impact of what looks to be a Category 4 Hurricane Ida. Germany was struck with catastrophic flooding due to historic rainfall in a matter of days. The nation of Greece is still trying to control unprecedented wildfires that have produced images of evacuations that look more like a scene from the movie 2012 rather than real life. It's clear that any mitigation efforts to take against climate change must have a global approach rather than domestic. As many nations in the global South began to chart their future following decolonization movements of the 20th century, it quickly became clear that the claws of Western colonizing powers were dug in much deeper than previously thought. In this upcoming clip, Dr. Kaboub describes 5 different ways that these colonizing nations have and continue to take advantage of the global South by trapping them in a perpetual cycle. Similar to what states here in the United States must do to entice businesses, this exploitation results in a race to the bottom among global South nations that only serves to further hurt their people.
And it turns out that those strategies are actually a trap. And I'm going to go over these, 5 key strategies that most people usually think of in terms of economic development. Number one, let's start with tourism. The problem with tourism is, yes, it brings in dollar revenues, but you have to, you end up importing more food to feed the tourist. You end up importing more energy to transport and heat and cool the hotels for them and transport, the food and equipments needed for the tourism industry. So you end up actually losing even more. Number 2, foreign direct investment. You end up, racing to the bottom, lowering your standards for health and environment and labor standards to attract multinational corporations who are coming in essentially to take advantage of the assembly line status that you've established in your industrial system. And then the profits from the industries will be repatriated anyway. Export-oriented growth, it turns out if you specialize in low value-added content, those export industries will import all the technology, all the capital, all the intermediate goods. But in the process of encouraging exports, you end up subsidizing their electricity bills. You end up subsidizing their labor costs. In terms of the focus on privatizing state-owned enterprises. It does work as a band-aid solution, but once you privatize the telecom, the water company, the electric company, you can't privatize them again. You spend the money in 2 or 3 years, and then you're back to square one. The idea of attracting foreign investors to your financial markets, you end up manipulating your interest rates, your monetary policy in order to attract foreign investors to your stock market. So you end up attracting them by lowering the tax rate, eliminating capital controls, and targeting inflation, which is what they want. You end up essentially attracting speculators primarily. Real long-term investors are not interested in economies that manipulate their exchange rates and manipulate their interest rates for short-term economic boost.
So the complex puzzle of how to solve our present climate crisis while also creating a just economic solution for the global South involves 3 major pieces. These include the fact that our planet is literally on fire, we have millions of people who want to work for fair wages, and the fact that we have more efficient and reliable technological solutions to help curb carbon emissions and economic inequality. That is what puts many of the nations of the Global South in a very unique position. Many of the resources needed to power the green technology are found in the Global South, but extracting them often results in devastating ecological effects on some of the most vulnerable communities on Earth. Rather than relying on the status quo, it is our ethical responsibility to dedicate substantial resources to research and develop low-impact materials that will build an infrastructure for a 100% circular economy that will reuse and recycle each component back into the cycle instead of relying on finite materials.
So what we're talking about here is developing an economic development strategy that moves away from these 5 strategies. As they say, if you're in a deep hole, the first thing you do is you stop digging. MMT provides a framework, and we're not going to do this unless we invest in mobilizing domestic resources to invest in sustainable agriculture, to invest in renewable energy production domestically. And then number 3, in terms of climbing up the ladder, so to speak, of the value-added chain, you're not going to be able to do that unless you invest in education, and especially in technical and vocational training, and have an industrial strategy that's actually built on and designed to move your industrial production capacity from low value-added content to high value-added content. Ideally, you'll do that in partnership with universities, with commitment to fund research and development in strategic areas that allow you to acquire a stronger degree of economic resilience to these external shocks.
The solution to these pressing issues are within reach, but we are told over and over again that the main obstacle in our way is how to pay for it. We know that this argument for we can't afford it is simply not true. It is a fact that spending capacities of the global north are substantially more than in the south. Spending and taxation at the national level are both very important, but we must decouple them in the sense that taxation is necessary to pay for something at the national level. In other words, we don't need to tax the rich to fund a global Green New Deal, but we can still tax their unethical wealth out of existence. As the beneficiaries of unearned wealth due in part to the extricative policies of our imperial history, it is our responsibility to implement a global Green New Deal that is coupled with reparations for colonial and post-colonial harm done to the global south and to the planet as a whole. By financially compensating climate and colonial debt and transferring green technology and resources to nations in need of assistance, we can revamp our global economy that will ensure a sustainable and equitable system for all the inhabitants of the globe. In our final clip, Dr. Kaboub explains how we can use the lens of MMT to help achieve this global framework.
What MMT is saying, what modern monetary theory is saying, is that government spending is not limited by tax revenues or by borrowing capacity. In fact, the fiscal policy space is much larger than that, but it's not unlimited. There's a limit to it. So the real limit to government spending capacity or the fiscal policy space is the risk of inflation. And the risk of inflation is determined by 2 key factors: the availability of productive capacity. In other words, if we run out of equipment and skilled labor and materials to produce more stuff, the good news about this risk of inflation is that with industrial planning and industrial strategy and investment in strategic areas, we can start to increase the availability of productive capacity. The second source of inflation, which is extremely important, is that inflation can happen also because of too much abusive market power, where you have corporate interest in key areas of the economy. It could be healthcare, it could be in the energy sector, it could be in the transportation sector or the real estate sector, where you have key players who can raise prices because they can. And that kind of inflation, we're not going to eliminate it by spending less. That kind of inflation, you get rid of it by taxing and regulating their market power out of existence. In other words, you make those markets more competitive. In other words, you reclaim the democratic process. So here, when we say we tax and regulate corporations, we're not taxing them in order to generate revenues for the state to fund its activities. So MMT decouples the spending, and then we tax to decarbonize the economy. So tax fossil fuel companies and regulate them, not because we need their money or their permission to transition to a clean economy, but because we want to decarbonize the economy. You tax the oligarchs, not because we need their money or their permission to fund education, but because we want to protect democracy from oligarchy. You want to reduce their power and influence in politics. And that's an important function of taxation.
As you can see, the current global financial system extracts nearly $2 trillion annually from the global south. It is a broken system that must be repaired. This isn't about just righting a historical wrong. Without a major structural transformation, the human species will not survive. By harnessing the economic power of MMT, we can build a framework to fund a global Green New Deal that ensures restorative justice and global sustainability for all. If you enjoyed tonight's video, make sure to check us out at realprogressives.org and subscribe to get notifications on our new video streams in YouTube, Periscope, Facebook, Twitch, and Rockfin. Also, if you want to support the work that we do at Real Progressives, make sure to check out our Patreon page, where for only a few bucks a month, you can support our endeavors overall. Thank you, and y'all have a great week.